It was Hank Williams and Webb Pierce and Tennessee Ernie Ford country, and then there was, of course.
But with famous people, people are always projecting on one all the time. It's just constant projection.
Van Morrison possessed one of music's most soulful voices.
In deep confusion, in great despair, when I reach out.
And an equally fierce temper when it came to drummers who couldn't match his spiritual intensity.
He worked with me on. He's done a lot of albums too over the years. Yeah. So that was a deliberate.
The Belfast mystic who created transcendent moments through songs like Moon Dance and Into the Mystic demanded absolute musical communion from his rhythm section.
Just doing it. It's very hard I find it difficult to talk about music because music for me is doing it.
And he had brutal contempt for drummers who treated their craft as anything less than sacred duty. Welcome to another episode of Music Rivalry Exposed, where today we're uncovering the perfectionist rage of Van Morrison and the 6 drummers who triggered his legendary wrath.
Sometimes lyrics first, music second, sometimes music first, lyrics second, sometimes...
The Irish soul master was notorious for his demanding rehearsals and explosive studio outbursts when musicians failed to capture the divine groove he was chasing. Music is a spiritual practice, Morrison once snapped at a drummer during a 1974 recording session. If you're not connecting to something higher, then you're just making noise?
This was like that must have been early 90s.
Those words became his standard for judging every drummer who dared step behind the kit in his presence. From mechanical playing to ego-driven performances, Morrison's hatred for these drummers wasn't just about musical differences.
So, yeah, because people understood that you had to get it now and it was in the moment.
It was about protecting the sacred space where rhythm and soul unite. These weren't simple personality clashes, but spiritual battles between different approaches to musical worship. So prepare yourself for some soul-crushing revelations about the man who demanded nothing less than rhythmic enlightenment from everyone around him. 6. Tommy Aldridge. Opening our countdown at number 6 is Morrison's clash with heavy metal powerhouse Tommy Aldridge. Morrison's disgust with the hard rock veteran wasn't about his double bass skills. It was about watching Aldridge's aggressive, spotlight-grabbing style completely destroy the subtle dynamics that Morrison considered essential for spiritual musical expression. The conflict reportedly occurred during a brief 1980s collaboration attempt when Morrison was exploring different musical directions. According to former Warner Brothers producer Lenny Waronker, Morrison lasted exactly 3 songs with Aldridge before stopping the session, telling everyone present, "This man thinks drumming is about proving how loud he can hit things. He's turned my meditation into a demolition derby."
Exercise for drumming is drumming, and just very blessed, mostly.
What revolted Morrison wasn't Aldridge's power, but his volume obsession. While Morrison was seeking drummers who could create space for his voice to breathe and his melodies to float, Aldridge was delivering what Morrison reportedly called caveman rhythms, and drumming that drowns out every subtle emotion I'm trying to express in these songs. Real rhythm should lift the spirit, not assault it, Morrison told Rolling Stone in 1985, defending his belief that drums should enhance rather than overpower musical moods. The philosophical gulf became obvious when Aldridge suggested adding drum solos to Morrison's compositions. At that moment, witnesses claim Morrison walked out of the studio entirely, later telling his manager, "I don't hire drummers to masturbate in public while I'm trying to create something beautiful." Aldridge seemed confused by Morrison's rejection, later calling him intense but unreasonable in interviews. But for Morrison, Aldridge represented everything wrong with modern drumming: ego replacing service, and volume replacing sensitivity. 5. Carmine Appice. At number 5, we encounter Morrison's battle against drumming theatrics. Carmine Appice. Morrison's irritation with the Vanilla Fudge powerhouse wasn't about his rock credentials. It was about watching Appice treat drumming like a performance art piece instead of the rhythmic foundation that Morrison's spiritual music required. The tension reportedly surfaced during a 1970s recording project when Morrison was seeking a drummer for his more experimental material. According to former Atlantic Records engineer Tom Dowd, Morrison auditioned Appice for one afternoon and immediately dismissed him, saying, "Carmine's more interested in being watched than being heard. He's turning my songs into his personal variety show." What annoyed Morrison wasn't Appice's technique, but his showmanship priorities. While Morrison was looking for drummers who would disappear into the music and create invisible rhythmic support, Appice was delivering what Morrison reportedly called Vegas drumming and playing that makes people focus on the drummer instead of the song's emotional message.
Yeah, it was a bit of a shock. Yeah, he did tribute to me way back when he covered "Here Comes the Night."
Drums should serve the music's spirit, not compete with it for attention, Morrison told Melody Maker in 1976, explaining his preference for understated rhythm work. The artistic conflict became clear when Appice demonstrated various stick tricks during their session. Witnesses claim Morrison stopped him mid-flourish, saying, "I need someone who talks to God through rhythm, not someone who talks to the audience through acrobatics." Appice seemed genuinely surprised by Morrison's dismissal, later expressing respect for his musical vision. But for Morrison, Appice represented the commercialization of rhythm, turning what should be sacred musical communion into an entertainment industry spectacle that destroyed authentic spiritual connection. Fourth, Neil Peart. Number 4 brings us to Morrison's intellectual drumming rebellion, Neil Peart of Rush. Morrison's contempt for the progressive rock master wasn't about his technical abilities. It was about watching Peart transform drumming into an academic exercise that completely eliminated the spontaneous emotional expression Morrison considered drumming's true purpose. The philosophical clash reportedly emerged when Morrison heard Rush's complex compositions during the late 1970s. According to former Mercury Records executive Cliff Bernstein, Morrison listened to Tom Sawyer once and turned off the radio, telling his band, "Neil's playing like he's solving mathematical equations behind that kit. Where's the heart? Where's the instinct that makes rhythm actually move your soul?" What disturbed Morrison wasn't Peart's precision, but his calculated approach. While Morrison sought drummers who could respond instinctively to musical moments and create organic rhythmic conversations, Peart was achieving acclaim through what Morrison reportedly called drumming by blueprint, and rhythms that sound like they were designed by engineers instead of felt by human beings. Music should surprise both the player and the listener, Morrison told Canadian musician in 1981, criticizing the trend toward over-composed drumming that eliminated spontaneous magic. The cultural divide became apparent when progressive rock fans began expecting all drummers to match Peart's complex arrangements. At a 1982 music industry gathering, witnesses claim Morrison refused to discuss modern drumming trends, later telling colleagues, "I won't celebrate the death of intuitive rhythm just because it's technically impressive." Peart seemed focused on pushing drumming's intellectual boundaries rather than preserving its emotional core. But for Morrison, Peart represented rhythm's sterilization, replacing natural musical flow with academic complexity that killed the spiritual connection between drummer and song. 3. Stewart Copeland. At number 3, we discover Morrison's most generational conflict, Stewart Copeland of the Police.
And you will see it come true.
Morrison's frustration with the new wave innovator wasn't about his punk influences. It was about watching Copeland's hyperactive, attention deficit style destroy the patient, meditative grooves that Morrison believed were essential for meaningful musical communication.
Got me into it in the first place, jazz, some blues, and, just stuff that got me into it when
The irritation reportedly peaked during the early 1980s when the Police's frenetic energy was dominating radio. According to former Island Records executive Chris Blackwell, Morrison would change stations whenever the Police came on, telling him, "Stewart's," playing like he's having a nervous breakdown behind the kit. He can't sit still long enough to let a groove develop naturally. What bothered Morrison wasn't Copeland's creativity, but his restlessness. While Morrison was seeking drummers who could establish hypnotic patterns that allowed songs to breathe and develop organically, Copeland was achieving success through what Morrison reportedly called hyperkinetic drumming and rhythms that change direction every 2 measures, like they're afraid of commitment. Great grooves need time to cast their spell, Morrison told Modern Drummer in 1983, defending his belief that patience was drumming's most important virtue. The artistic tension became obvious when New Wave's rapid-fire approach began influencing younger drummers to avoid sustained grooves. At a 1984 recording session, witnesses claim Morrison stopped a drummer who was copying Copeland's busy style, saying, "I need you to play 1 groove beautifully, not 50 grooves badly." 2. Lars Ulrich. At number 2, we uncover Morrison's most visceral drumming hatred, Lars Ulrich of Metallica. Morrison's revulsion toward the Danish metal drummer wasn't about musical genres. It was about watching Ulrich's aggressive, mechanical assault completely annihilate the gentle dynamics and subtle shadings that Morrison considered drumming's highest artistic achievement. The disgust reportedly crystallized during the late 1980s when Metallica's machine gun precision was being celebrated as revolutionary.
So, I mean, I guess it didn't really pick up until like I said.
According to former Polydor Records executive Frank Barcelona, Morrison attended a metal showcase out of curiosity and left during Metallica's set, telling his companions, "Lars is using drums like weapons of war instead of instruments of peace. He's destroying everything beautiful about rhythm and calling it innovation." What appalled Morrison wasn't Ulrich's power, but his brutality. While Morrison sought drummers who could create delicate rhythmic landscapes that supported his voice's nuanced emotional range, Ulrich was achieving fame through what Morrison reportedly called sonic terrorism, and drumming that sounds like artillery fire when it should sound like heartbeats. "Drums should heal the soul, not assault it," Morrison told Q magazine in 1989, expressing his belief that rhythm should comfort, rather than attack, listeners. The cultural war became personal when metal's aggressive approach began influencing rock drumming generally. At a 1990 studio session, witnesses claim Morrison fired a drummer who was incorporating Ulrich-style double bass patterns, saying, "I hire drummers to create sanctuary, not to simulate battle zones." 1. Phil Collins. And finally, at number 1, we reach the most devastating revelation of all, Phil Collins.
I can feel it coming in the air now.
Yes, the Genesis drummer turned superstar reportedly earned Van Morrison's ultimate contempt in what became the most painful betrayal of drumming's spiritual mission in rock history. The heartbreak reportedly began during the 1980s when Collins was dominating both pop and session work with his processed, gated reverb sound. According to former Virgin Records producer Hugh Padgham, Morrison heard Collins's drum sound on multiple radio hits and became visibly agitated, telling him, "Phil has taken everything organic about drumming and run it through machines until it sounds like robots playing. He's murdered the human heartbeat and replaced it with digital death." What devastated Morrison wasn't Collins' success, but his approach to rhythm. While Morrison had spent his career seeking drummers who could channel natural human pulse and create intimate rhythmic connection, Collins was achieving worldwide recognition through what Morrison reportedly called factory-manufactured beats and drumming that sounds like it was created by computers instead of human souls. Collins seemed focused on achieving commercial consistency rather than preserving rhythmic authenticity. But for Morrison, Collins represented drumming's ultimate spiritual death, the transformation of rhythm from human expression into manufactured product that destroyed music's capacity for genuine emotional connection and transcendent communion. So there you have it. Even soul masters can harbor crushing disappointments. Was Van Morrison protecting rhythm's sacred mission or just impossible to please? Which drummer controversy struck deepest? Subscribe and share your spiritual rhythm insights below.